Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the Speed Chess Championship, which is being held on chess.com. Now, this event has been running for a long time, and over the past 8 editions, there have been only 2 winners. And those 2 winners are yours truly. I've won the event 5 times, and the 5-time world champion Magnus Carlsen has won the other 3. Magnus is the defending champion of this event. He did defeat me by 1 point in a thrilling epic final last year. So the event is back, 16 players. A couple of us have already played our first round matches, but Magnus is paired up with Minh Le Tuan from Vietnam. Now, Minh Le Tuan is also known as Wonderful Time on chess.com. He was one of the strongest IMs in the world for a very long time before finally getting his title, I believe 1 or 1.5 years ago. All right, first game of the match, Magnus playing with the white pieces. They're playing 5 minutes with 1 second increment. For whatever the reasons, the clocks aren't showing on this game, but that is life. So the game starts with the move e4. We got the move e5 from Minh Le. We get knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. This is the classic Spanish opening. We get a6, bishop a4, bishop c5, and now the move c3. You might remember that this is exactly what Hikaru Nakamura, yours truly, the famous streamer, played against Magnus Carlsen in the recent Norway chess event. I also played against Jan Nepomniachtchi in the candidates tournament as well in Toronto. So we get the move castles from Magnus. Here, white can also play the move d4 right away. It's a question of whether white wants to go d4 or castle the king first. So we get castles, knight g6 is played, Magnus plays d4, we get bishop a7, and now we have the move bishop g5 being played. In our matchup in Norway chess, Magnus did not put the bishop on g5. Instead, I believe he played, I don't remember if it was the order with bishop e3 or he played h3, but we effectively got to a position, I think this was a position where Magnus made a slight mistake here by playing bishop takes knight. And after pawn takes pawn, we got the move takes, queen takes d4, takes, and after d takes c6, I had a very interesting game, which would end in a draw. Now, in this game, Magnus obviously better prepared, and he decides to play the move bishop g5, which is what Jan Nepomniachtchi played against me in the candidates. We get f6, bishop e3, castles, and now we have the move rook e1. King h8 is played. The idea behind king h8 is that black would love to play d5, but if you go d5 right away, it's already spaghetti-o time after takes, and bishop b3, simply winning the queen on d5. So king h8 played by Minh Le, and now we get the move h3. We have the move d6, knight bd2, takes, and after takes, we get this move f5. Now, in my game against Jan, I believe that I did play this move d5, which is a fairly serious mistake here, but f5 is the correct approach instead. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm wrong. I played d7, d5, not d7, d6. So scrap that last little bit that I said. That's how you guys also know that I'm doing this recap on the fly. I'm not doing tons of work and having everything prepared ahead of time. So you get f5. e5 is played here. Now we have the move b5 being played by Minh Le. I do believe that in a recent Title Tuesday game against Jan Nepomniachtchi, once again referring to many times here in this video, I played the move d5 and went on to have a resounding victory in a Title Tuesday game. Probably that video is somewhere on my YouTube channel. I don't know exactly where it is, but pointing it out nonetheless. Instead, Minh Le goes b5. We get the move bishop b3. We have d takes e5, and now the move bishop b7 is played, fianchettoing the bishop and intending to try and attack very quickly on the king side with a move like knight to f4, for example, or the move queen to g5 to hit the pawn on g2. Magnus, however, does have a passed e pawn, which he can push up the board, combined with pressure on potentially an open c file. So Magnus goes knight to f3 here, and now Minh Le plays queen e7. Of course, against a player of Magnus' caliber, you do not want to trade the queens here, because after rook takes d1, I think a rook is best here. White now can play on the open d file. White also has a passed e pawn, and even though the white pawn structure is ruined here, white has control of the center of the board. And against a player like Magnus Carlsen, who is a phenomenal endgame player, you do not want any part of this. So Minh Le plays queen to e7, and now Magnus goes e6, and here we get this move rook a d8, queen to e2, and the first move that I'm not a huge fan of, which is this move bishop to e4. Now Minh Le could have also tried to go c5 and c4 here, which would close down the access to this pawn for the bishop. Say a3 c4, just to illustrate the point here. Black is a chain of 3, and the bishop is no longer on an open diagonal. Instead, Minh Le decides to go bishop e4. We get the move queen to e3, and now we have this move c5, which is a slight mistake. What Minh Le should have played here was a move rook to d3, creating the kebab on the 6th rank and attacking the queen at the same time. Probably Minh Le thought, wait, but white goes queen g5 here, and if queens are coming off the board with his passed e pawn, white is simply better. In reality, white is not better, and this comes back to one thing I've spoken about many times, which is the Magnus effect. You always overestimate, or you assume what he's doing is correct, and you have done something wrong, versus assuming that he is human and he can make mistakes. The reason this is actually good for black is that after bishop takes knight, the queens come off the board, white takes the bishop here. Black can now play the very quiet move g6. Let's say rook a c1, c6 here. Knight guards the pawn on c6, all the while blockading this pass pawn on the e file. And after, say, king g2, king g7, king f6, just to illustrate the point, and rook d8 here. White's pawn on e6 is actually a long-term weakness. Black can play for c5, c4. He controls the d file, and this pawn on e6 will eventually be lost. Instead, Minh plays the move c5, and now Magnus is able to play the move knight g5, attacking the bishop on e4, but also threatening to fork with knight to f7 as well. Here, Minh plays the move c4, which is a mistake. He should have played rook d3, probably thought that white goes something like queen to c1 here, and with a bishop under attack, the knight coming to f7, he assumed that he was in trouble. So he goes c4. Magnus plays knight to f7, checking the king, forking the king and the rook at the same time. We got rook takes knight, pawn takes rook, and here Minh takes the pawn. Now Minh should have taken the bishop on b3, but after pawn takes bishop, you might be thinking, wait, after queen takes pawn, for example, like queen g5, threatening mate here, black is doing very well. And if white were to take with the pawn, queen f7, let's just say rook a6, and even a quiet move like h6, black has a bishop and a knight in return for the rook. I guess here it doesn't work, so queen b6, which hits the knight and the rook at the same time, but nonetheless, let's just say rook f8. Black has a bishop and a knight in return for the rook, and he should be better. Unfortunately, after pawn takes bishop, white can play f3 here, which pins the bishop on e4. If you move the bishop, I trade off, and here I have a rook for a bishop and win the game. If you play queen takes pawn, after pawn takes bishop, now it's a knight for rook, and again, white should be winning. So Minh plays queen takes pawn. We get rook a d1 here, a nice move from Magnus trying to trade off the towers. We get rook f8. If you were to play rook takes rook, white simply recaptures with the bishop, goes f3, trades the queens, and will win the game in due time. So we get rook f8. f3 played here to attack the bishop on the e4 square. Minh goes pawn takes bishop, b takes a2. We get takes, and now the move rook to a1 is played by Magnus. Here, Magnus is going to win the pawn on a2, and with a rook for the knight, the game, or the result, I should say, is never really in doubt. Minh plays queen d5. We get the move b3 here. Another nice move by Magnus. Queen guards the pawn. After rook takes pawn here, you also guard. So if knight f4 is played, you can play rook takes a2, guarding against the checkmate threats on the second row. So we got h6, rook a2, rook f6, rook f2. Another perfect move from Magnus, simply trading off the rooks here and simplifying the position. We get rook c6, rook d2, queen f5, and now after queen e8 here, Minh resigns the game in view of the fact that after king to h7 here, white can simply capture the rook and has two rooks in return for a knight, which is simply too much power. So a very nice win for Magnus in the first game of the match. He goes up 1-0, and now we're going to move to the second game we're taking a look at. Now, this match was a long match with many games played in 5+1, 3+1, different time formats, but this game that we're looking at was played in the 3+1 portion. Now, by this point, Magnus was already very far ahead. I think it was up something like 8.5, 2.5, or around that score, +6, and so he thought he could have some fun. This game starts with e4. We get e5 from Minh, and now Magnus plays the move to f4. And this is, of course, the classic King's Gambit. Minh, of course, takes the pawn, and now Magnus plays a slightly unusual move, which is knight c3. Now, this move is actually known according to theory, but it is one of these lines that has not been played much in recent times. It's considered to be a little bit dubious versus the traditional third moves knight to f3 or the move bishop c4, which is a favorite of Robert James Fischer, the first American world chess champion. Magnus instead plays the move knight c3 here. Now, I have actually done a video. I'll think I'll link it in the description, or I'll at least mention it in passing in a comment on this video. But I did a video quite a while back about a famous game that I believe was played, I think in 1965, if I'm not mistaken, or 1955, between David Bronstein, a very famous player from the Soviet Union, and Paul Keres, one of the greatest players to never become world champion. I guess both of them fit in that category. Now, in that game, when I did my video, the line that I mentioned was queen h4, king e2, move d5, and I believe it was knight takes d5. I think it was knight d5. Was it knight f6 here? I think it was, or was it bishop g4? Maybe it was bishop g4. At any rate, somehow they got a position, trying to remember it, where eventually they got to something like this, and the game was very, very complicated. Black, I believe, did go on to win the game, but I'll have to find that video and mention it specifically, where black is this tower of power, and it's very complicated. At any rate, this is very ancient theory. It was popular nearly 50-60 years ago, but in today's modern game, it is not considered to be acceptable. So we get the move queen we got the move knight to c6 being played here by Minh. He could have also played queen h4 right away, and after knight c6 we get the move d4, and now we have queen h4 check being played, and now we get king e2. And Magnus here has played what we like to call a delayed Bongcloud by putting his king on e2. In return, however, white, there's a big white center. You got these pawns on d4 and e4, quick development with knight f3, knight d5, all kinds of threats, and black's queen can be harassed very quickly. So Minh goes d6 here. I believe the computer prefers to move g5, but already here after knight f3, queen h5, and I think, is it knight d5, king d8, and h4? Game is spinning wildly out of control here. It's really not clear what's going on. White can further reinforce the center with c3 here. There's pressure on both the pawns on f4 and g5 here. Pressure on c7 with the knight, and it's a wild skirmish. Instead, Minh plays the move d6. Now Magnus goes knight f3. We got bishop g4, and now we have bishop takes f4 being played. Here Minh takes the knight. Magnus recaptures the king. Only choice, by the way, because if you take with the pawn after queen takes f4, knight to d5, I believe queen h4, knight c7 here takes, and king c8 followed by king b8. Black should be better, as you will eat the knight in the corner. So Magnus takes with the king here, using the king as an active piece. White does have the two B's here, but also a big white center, and black is really lacking in development here, having not moved any of these 5 pieces off their original squares. We get the move knight to f6, g3 played by Magnus, queen h5, king g2, and after takes, the game has simplified where we're in an endgame, but you have the big white center, you have the two B's as well, and for a player of Magnus Carlsen's caliber, this is simply a dream. And you can also tell from the evaluation bar, this is plus 1.2 already. So huge success in the opening for Magnus, and the game continues with the move castles. Magnus goes bishop c4 here, pressuring the pawn on f7. We get knight takes e4 being played, and this is simply a blunder on the spot. Probably Minh should have played the move rook d7 here, but after bishop g5, let's just say knight e8, rook f1, f6, and bishop e3. You have the two B's here. You can push pawns in the center of the board, and black really has very poor pieces on the back row. Now, it's not winning, of course, immediately, and for players who are a little bit weaker, you're probably wondering, why is this winning? It's because long-term, white has much more space with the big white center, more scope for the bishops, and a player above a certain caliber should win this game. So Minh probably feeling desperation here, being concerned. He plays the move knight takes e4 instead, but this is simply a blunder, because after knight takes e4 and d5, black is forking the bishop and the knight here. If white were to move the bishop after takes and knight d4, black can try to claim that he's in the game, but unfortunately here Magnus has this move knight to g5 here, and after pawn takes bishop and knight takes f7, this knight is forking both the rooks. You're going to lose a rook, and with it you will lose the game. We get bishop e7 from Minh. Magnus takes, we get takes, and now the move d5, knight b4, and here we get this move a3. Another very nice touch by Magnus. Many ways to win the game, but after a3, if black takes the pawn on c2, you have rook d2 here, and the knight is simply trapped. Can't go to d4, e3. You go here, I take. If 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 you go to a1, I also take with the rook. So no squares available for the fours here on d4, e3, e1, or b4, or a1, and therefore the knight gets stuck. Now you could try to play g5 here for more advanced players who are wondering, but here I believe that white can simply play this move. I thought bishop e5 was cleanest, but apparently after bishop e5, I guess there's knight e3 and then some rook e8, and if you take, there's bishop f6, and the show goes on. So maybe not quite so simple. Let me take a look and see what the computer wants. It wants this move d6 here after takes. Rook c2 takes, rook c4, king d7, rook f4. White should be winning. Many ways to win, but maybe it would have been worth a shot for Minh to do this. Instead, Minh plays this move knight to a6, and now we get the move d6 from Magnus. Another great move, simplifying the position here. He's opening up all these files for the two towers here, and the rest is simply hopeless. Minh goes bishop f6. We get c3, knight c7, rook e1, knight a8, bishop e5 here. Another nice touch from Magnus. Now black has to trade the bishops, or you will lose this pawn on g7. So he goes knight b6. We get chop, rook to e7 here, creating the kebab on the 7th rank. And Minh plays h5. We get the move rook d4, king b8, and now we have rook f7, rook e8, king to h3 being played. Not the only move. You could also just take the pawn, but at this point, it doesn't really matter. Simply all moves win. Get king h3 being played here. a6 from Minh, not rook to e2, by the way, because after check, knight c8 and rook f8, white now wins the knight on c8. So we get the move a6, rook takes f6, knight a4, rook to f2 being played, and here Minh decides to resign the game. It's been hopeless for many moves, but the reason he resigns here is after knight b6 to guard the pawn. White can go king h4, let's just say rook e5, check, king a7, and rook h8. take the pawn on h5, and with these 2 pawns going up the board in the center, on the edge of the board I should say, 2 pawns going up, white simply will win the game in short order. So in this position, after rook takes f6, Minh resigns this game, and Magnus gets another nice win in this match. Magnus would go on to dominate this match thoroughly. He would win by a whopping final score of 20.5 to 3.5. Now, it's a great score, but Magnus, in fact, I believe, had an even bigger margin of victory against none other than the current world number 3 player in the world, Fabiano Caruana. I believe it was in the 2022 event when he beat Fabiano by a score of 22 to 4. So even though he trounces Minh in this match, it's still not Magnus's best performance in the SCC, but nonetheless very, very impressive to see. So Magnus gets a huge one, 20.5, 3.5. He moves into the next round, where I believe he will play against Arjun Erigaisi. So we look forward to that match. It should be a really, really good match between one of the rising juniors from India and the 5-time world champion. So it should be great to watch. Most importantly, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the first round of the Speed Chess Championship, which is being held on chess.com. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more recaps in the very near future. I'm also playing in the SCC, so I'll probably be recapping some of my matches too, but I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and most importantly, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week as we go into the weekend. So have a great rest of your day, everybody, and I'll see you very soon. Have a good one. Bye.